The Derby Meeting. Hosted by Lee McCroskey. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. This is great. Welcome to another Derby Meeting. We are here in the house today with Pat Roach, Seth Hood, Quintin Roberts, Alicia Huck, Lee McCroskey, and me. So welcome everyone along. Anybody who's watching, it's probably not very many people yet, but they don't know that we're only going live on YouTube now because we're turning these into full-on episodes. I'll do some quick introductions and we'll get into our topic for today. First up, we have Quintin Roberts with Cardinal Senior Benefits. Quintin was on this show. If you guys want to get more details on all of these folks, just go to their respective episodes because they've all been on the Ponytails podcast. But Quintin is kicking some butt over at Cardinal Senior Benefits. They are growing fast at a fast rate with all their giant team. We had Pedro Vega, Greta Huerta on here, and they are all helping with late-term life insurance. And more importantly, they're building a phenomenal team with a fantastic culture. If you guys are interested in learning more about career with them, reach out to us. We can get you in touch with Quintin. Next up, we had Seth Hood. Like I knew you could. This one, Seth is an old friend of mine. I was there when he first got started with Southwestern Advantage. He is the spear of Elevate Wellness, although he is working with Zane Gallagher, another fellow bookman, and Joe Ignis, and a bunch of other guys. I don't even know who else is on your team now. It's growing so fast. But these guys are in charge and kicking butt at helping you get into shape and feeling good about it. There's a bunch of different diets and a bunch of different scams and shams. These guys are doing it in a way that is from the inside out. And so they are currently trust me, I worked with them for like 9 months and it was no quick, but it was fit. So it was awesome and it worked really, really well. So if you guys want more details on that, especially if you're listening in and you just got done with the book field and you need to get into shape for Sizzler, there is a whole competition that they're doing right now. Go check out more details there. Pat Roach is the president of Southwestern Real Estate. One of the first few people that's right, look at him. He's one of the first few people that believed in our show enough to say, hey, I want to help. I want to be a part of this, and we are very, very thankful for that. They are currently in, I think, 14 different states now. Pat, is that correct? And expanding.
8, but that's fine.
Okay, soon to be 14 different states all over the country. And they are in the real estate business. If you guys are price build up, if you guys are into getting right now, it's a really interesting time to be in real estate because things are starting to sell, and it's a good time for you guys to get involved. So if you guys are fans of HGTV, like a place that's 99% drama free, and just want to work in a company that has really, really good culture, or I guess let's just say kept all the great parts about the Southwestern culture, that might be a good spot for you. So reach out to us. We'll get you in touch with them. Alicia Huck with Maverick & Company. Alicia is in charge of helping people scale their businesses. So basically fast growing companies to take them from 1, 2, 3 million to boom, $100 million companies. And she's in charge of helping them grow as fast and as sustainable as possible. And of course, we all know Dr. Rock. Lee McCroskey's in the house. He is so graciously now helping us facilitate conversation here, adding some quick quips, and of course his eternal wisdom that we've all learned from us during our time in Southwestern. So I hope you guys enjoy. Today we are going to be talking about imposter syndrome. So if you are a business owner, if you have had any sort of product that you service that you've sold or that you wanted to help people with, maybe you're a coach, different situations where sometimes you feel like maybe you're not the right fit. I know it happens to me. We're going to open it up here for folks in the past, or for people here in the meeting who have felt this in the past and how to deal with this, what they've done in the past to deal with it. I'm going to point out, Pat, if that's cool with you. We're going to start it with you. And I'm only starting with you because I know we talked about this on your episode specifically, where you got entrusted to start a real estate company and you had no idea about real estate. So there had to have been some of that going on. Let's open it up with you and see where the conversation takes us.
So I guess starting off with, where have you felt like an imposter and how'd you work through that?
Yeah, let's just go with that. Sure.
I think imposter syndrome can show up at really interesting times. I mean, obviously, if we're going to start a new venture and we're crossing into territory that we've never worked before, there's obviously potential for that. I think some of that stuff is kind of like that's a little bit of an easier version, because I think that there's something about being new at something where, and especially like if you sold books, then you know kind of how to fake it till you make it type of thing. Like just you got to get started. And what I tell most of our agents is they're like, well, what do I do when people say, how long you been doing this? And I have to tell them, well, I'm brand new. It's like, well, yeah, but you're only new for a little while. Then you're not going to be new anymore. So let's, like, from a career perspective, let's not make this into a bigger thing than it actually is. This is a momentary challenge. And there's some things you can do to hitch your wagon to a top producing agent for assistance and partnership. So your clients are going to be well served, and you can kind of shed that brand new agent, you know, kind of association or whatever. Now, when I was starting the company, I didn't have that, but I had invested in real estate. And so I kind of diverted over to, well, I know about real estate because I've been investing in real estate and stuff like that. So people will be like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. You know, it's like just finding something that will answer the objection. Hopefully most people move forward. Do you probably lose some clients at a phase like that? Yeah, for sure. But eventually you are not new anymore. And so that won't happen as much. Where I find imposter syndrome to show up more for me today is that, like, so my birthday is this month. I'll be 49. And I've been thinking about what does it feel like to be 50, right? In a year. 49 is kind of 50 anyway. And I keep thinking, man, I thought I would know more stuff at 50 years old. Like, I thought I would kind of know a lot of stuff. And I know some things, but I feel like there are so many things I just don't know. And I'll get into conversations with business people all the time. And it seems like they know the stuff that I feel like I should have known by now that I don't know. And they're talking about these business concepts and things like that where they're acting like everybody knows this stuff. And I'm kind of sitting there just going, oh, yeah. Thankfully, I have learned how to keep my mouth shut, because I think the worst thing you can do in a situation like that is just prove to everybody you don't know by trying to act like you don't know. Now, at the same time, getting comfortable with the idea of going, hey, you're getting outside of my pay grade. I don't live in that world. Help me understand what you're talking about. Like, in other words, both of those things together kind of have been helpful tools for me to be able to go, I have boundaries. Everybody's got boundaries. So it's okay to say I'm out of my depth. And at the same time, keep your mouth shut a lot of times. And a lot of these things just go by and people carry their assumptions about you and maybe give you more credit than you deserve. And that might be helpful or whatever. But I think you have to kind of learn to get comfortable in those two spaces.
Would that not reinforce your imposter syndrome to just smile and nod and go, I don't understand anything you're saying in your head?
The weird thing is that I think, does it increase it inside of me? Is that?
Just generally. I mean, I think that's wise. Those are wise thoughts when you're talking about, listening to somebody who's all buzzwordy. You're like, I don't know what you're buzzwording about. You just kind of go, fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, the reason why I find it comforting or diminishing that is it's because I just think so much of what people are talking about it's not really super relevant. People just like to fill the space with things they're talking about. And they don't necessarily care if you're tracking with them. They're just talking about these things. And so that's where I think it in some ways, it makes me feel like I know how this game is played, even if I don't understand what you're talking about. I can just let you do your thing, and I'll just, if I'm called upon, I can say, well, actually, this is a little out of my pay grade, blah, blah, blah. but up until that point, they're not calling on me because they're not like this. I guess I'm just saying it gives me a certain amount of confidence to go, I know how to be above this moment, even though I would kind of like to know what these guys are talking about.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah.
It's good.
What I'll tell you is also interesting is this silence concept shows up really powerfully in negotiations. When I was a new agent, and we'd start negotiating over a property or whatever, and it was the recession, things were pretty tense, and I didn't really know what I was doing that much. I didn't have I was a one-person company, right? So I couldn't call Henry and say, what do I do? But I would notice that as people would start to kind of go on and on about their side of things, and I wasn't tracking, I would, instead of saying something and showing, oh, you really don't know what I'm talking about, staying completely quiet would unnerve them to the degree that they would double back on their own arguments, because it was almost like they couldn't tell if I was smarter than them. They couldn't tell if I was, sniffing out their BS or whatever. The silence thing was just extremely powerful. And so
it's also unnerving to people who are being interviewed if you just give them the deadpan stare with no feedback, like I'm doing right now.
I can't deal with this. Log off.
Well, that would lead to a nice topic. Sometime we could do a series on listening.
I thought you were going to say we could do a topic on how to unnerve your opponent.
We could do
both. We could do both.
Which could be the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. Those are good thoughts, Pat. Anybody else, when you saw the topic, you went, oh yeah, I can talk about this, or oh, that reminds me of, or oh, I read a great article about. Yeah. I mean, can we back up? Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Andre said, well, maybe Lee can facilitate conversation. And then I took that as maybe Lee should dominate the conversation. So that's what I'm doing now.
Please do.
No, I'm just curious if, like, how you guys would define imposter syndrome. Just going back to what Pat said, people could go, yeah, yes, imposter syndrome. Yes, I don't really know what that is. Well, what is it? How would you define it? How do you, so take it. Alicia, you were raising your hand.
It's Andre's topic.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm going to let him or Seth start off how they define it.
Seth,
go ahead, Seth Hood.
Yeah. I would describe imposter syndrome as like just whenever you are either doing some kind of job or you're going into some kind of new territory, and you just have these thoughts where it's like, man, like, am I worthy of achieving this thing? Or am I the right person for this job? Like, am I supposed to actually be here?
Yes.
And I feel like it doesn't have to be whenever you're going to new territories, but naturally, I feel like that's a lot of times when it does come up, is like whenever you're like Pat Roach starting a new business, or whenever you are setting like new goals to a place that either you've never been to or other people have never been to. I think that's when it naturally comes up. But honestly, I just feel like it just comes up even in day-to-day sometimes, where it's like you're even having a conversation with someone, right? And you're like, man, like this person is way, way beyond me in my career or whatever it is. And it's just like, does this person have respect for me? Does this person like even like value my opinion? And so I think it's for the big things like setting goals, starting a new career, things like that, but also it can come down to even like literally your day-to-day conversations.
And I'll chime in and say that I think sometimes it shows up in ways that don't necessarily look like what you might think imposter syndrome would look like, right? For some people, it's they're perfectionists, but that's really driven by they don't feel like they're qualified to be there. And then the other place I think I see it is that kind of extreme brashness and arrogance where you're sort of like, all puffed up, trying to make sure that everybody knows how cool you are because you're not really sure that you are.
So people that are compensating.
Or overcompensating.
Well, that's what I meant.
Right.
Yeah. In other words, they're trying to cover a deficit. psychologically?
Loudly and aggressively.
Yes. Okay.
I
Good.
guess. Oh, Quintin, go ahead. Quintin unmuted himself. He's always
Yeah,
got
I'll
some
be.
wisdom.
I saw the topic, and my first thought was, "What the hell is imposter syndrome?" So I went to Google and I typed in imposter syndrome, just because I really didn't know, and it said it's that uncomfortable feeling you experience when you think you're unqualified and incompetent. You might look around and assume everyone knows what they're doing except you, and if you achieve something good, you chalk your accomplishments up to good luck. So when I thought of imposter syndrome, obviously everybody that's on this show or is listening sold books. I was actually thinking about it from, let's say you're out on the book field and you've hit back-to-back weeks of 600, 800 units, whatever it is, whatever is a higher number than you're used to hitting. And then you're thinking to yourself, like, I just got lucky. It's because I ran into that one big buyer who was a 54 unit. And then that momentum carried me to this other person. And I feel like I got lucky for the week because really 200 of those units, they were just gimmies. And so then you kind of try to talk yourself into, like, you had the success because you were luck. I actually didn't associate it with being new at something, but maybe there's multiple definitions or different avenues of imposter syndrome. So I don't know if what I just described is not imposter syndrome or if it's just there's different takes on it. And then I'm kind of curious, is this a common thing, imposter syndrome? Because literally it was the first time I'd seen the word before.
Yeah.
Well, if it was on Google, the definition was correct.
Absolutely. It was
So it's on the internet.
The internet doesn't lie, you guys.
No.
Yeah, this is all true.
I
think
wanted-
the reason
can I-
Oh,
Go
go ahead, Lee.
Well, I was
No,
just
the reason I
gonna
came
read
up with the topic.
Huh?
Hang on, wasn't Lee supposed to facilitate? I thought.
Come on, Andre,
just
know
gonna
your
answer-
role.
Why
I
does
was
Andre
answering the
keep
question that
butting in?
Lee asked. I was okay. I'm out of here.
No.
I was answering the question Lee asked. Which, the reason that I thought of this was because, like, oftentimes when I'm talking to people on the air, or like, or just we've had the conversations on the show where, or even myself, I'll just speak for myself. Like, when we started the podcast and we went full monetization, and Pat was talking to us about sponsoring, it was very much like, I've never. The first original contact was I've never monetized a podcast, so what am I going to tell Pat? Like, so I had to go do a bunch of research to not feel like an imposter, and I did. I mean, we set up a meeting like 2 days from that time, and for those 48 hours, I was digging articles, statistics, and really there wasn't really much about podcasting until I was able to, like, go down a rabbit hole. But at the moment that I set up for Pat, I go, holy cow, I have no idea what the heck I'm doing, and I'm about to ask someone to give me money to do something that I don't like. It was just a hobby for me, and at that moment I feel like I was an imposter. I felt like I was being fake, or I don't know. I wasn't, though. I was really trying to help Pat and trying to do something right, but there was this moment of, like, it's different than insecurity, because I knew I was doing a good job with the podcast, but it was more like, I just don't know where to go from here, and if I go in the wrong direction, there's responsibility that carries with this, and there's consequences. And so it felt like a much higher stakes to something that I wasn't really familiar with. That's what I thought of. So that's where the topic came from.
And you got through that by researching? Like, that was the thing that helped you get over the hump?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So in my specific case, I figured out what the value of what I was doing. So I went searching for value in what I was doing. And so what I landed at was, hey, look, we have the eyeballs of several thousand book people, mostly. What is that worth to you? And that's what the value proposition has been for all you guys, where it's like, hey, here's where we're at now. Here's how many people we know we have captive listening to us. What's the message you want to send out? And that I put my value in the ability to reach people, which makes sense for me. But I only did that and found out that was valuable because I did all that research and found out, oh, actually, having this many viewers on a podcast is actually more valuable than, millions on a TV show, because most people, or those 2-minute interviews that Quintin was talking about, just blip out because there's no, like, depth. And so anyway, yeah, research and finding value in outside of what I was, outside of myself, but more in what I was doing, I think.
Yeah, I was talking to class the other night. Like, I'm teaching a sales class right now, and one of them asked, how do you get confidence? Knowledge, you got to know what you're doing. And second, you have to try things you're not sure you can do and then be successful at them. That's how you get confidence. Those two things. So you went in heavy into research to build your knowledge, and then you tried it and you went, oh, I lived. And that gave you confidence. I'm very tempted to go way deeper than just imposter syndrome. I mean, can I read something?
Yes,
because
please.
If you guys have read Arthur Miller, have you seen any of his plays?
Playwright?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, he wrote Death of a Salesman. You probably all experienced that. And he also wrote After the Fall, which was an interesting play. It's like memory play. And the lead character is named Quintin. And he looks back on his life and all of his failures. And here's what he says. So this reminded me of something like imposter syndrome squared. He says this, more and more, I think that for many years, I looked at life like a case at law, a series of proofs. When you're young, you prove how brave you are or how smart, then what a good lover, then a good father, finally, how wise or powerful or what the hell ever. But underlying all of that, I see now there was a presumption that I was moving on an upward path towards some elevation where God knows what, I would be justified or even condemned. A verdict, anyway. I think now that my disaster really began when I looked up one day and the bench was empty, no judge in sight. And all that remained was the endless argument with myself, this pointless litigation of existence before an empty bench.
Ooh.
I mean, so when
wow.
Anyway, I saw a topic, imposter syndrome, and I started thinking, wow, this goes way deeper than going, I'm starting a new job and I don't feel comfortable. I'm like, this is universal at some level. Right? Am I right?
Yeah.
If I can
go ahead.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, Lee, because I actually think there's another way to gain confidence. And for people who don't know me, right, like I just one day was like, I think I'll be a consultant. I could do that, right? That sounds cool. And since then, I mean, I helped run a manufacturing company for a couple of years, which is funny because I don't know anything about manufacturing. And one day I was doing some work with the state of South Dakota's judges, their alternative courts program. And the night before a really big presentation with a lot of really important people, they just casually called and said, oh yeah, the entire state Supreme Court is going to sit in. And they mastered stone face. They just glare at you the whole time. They give nothing. Best poker faces in the world. And, at different times, I would kind of look around and go, well, what am I doing here, right? Like, am I the right person to be doing this job? But part of what got me through is that, for me, how it occurs is that imposter syndrome is really, it's kind of just a crappy thing to do in life. Like, it's indulgent. It's selfish in a lot of ways. Because if, I'm looking down on the road in front of my office, if there was a car accident out there and I saw somebody laying in the street bleeding, I wouldn't just sit up here and say, well, I don't have a medical degree. I wasn't the smartest, blah, blah, blah. No, you go help. You bring whatever it is that you have. So for me, part of what has gotten me through a lot of moments that felt really big, all the things that Lee just said, right? Doing the work, having a lot of those experiences under your belt, like there's just not that much stuff that feels scary, because when something isn't going right, I know to just hang in and keep going, right? That's what we all learned on the book field. But also, I think for me, your confidence is strongest when it comes from what you're committed to, because your results go up and down. But the truth is, if I have a really great day and I kill it with whatever group I'm with, that's awesome. The next day, I have to start all over, and my commitment is still the same. And if I fail, I wake up the day after that and my commitment is still the same. And if you're committed to making a difference and you have some humility about where your edges are, so you're not trying to be something you're not, I think a better way to look at life is like, when Pat started his company, look at all the good things he's done, the people that he's helped build careers, right? Quintin, Seth, all of us on this call, anybody who ever sold books, right? And I think really for me, I got that idea basically my old student manager, Jeff Hahn, because, you know, you were a B manager and you're like, what? Yeah, I know I kind of sort of sold a lot of books, but I also cried every day. So I don't know if I'm the best person to be managing people. And he just, for him, it was always the fact that you care more about their success means that you're qualified to at least have a seat at the table. So when I see an opportunity to make a difference, or I see someone that looks like they're, you know, the equivalent of bleeding in the street, like there's a lot of people who need a lot of help. There's a lot of good that can come of being willing to raise your hand. And for me, I'm happy to step aside if somebody more qualified shows up or somebody pushes me out of the way violently. But if I think I can make a difference, then I belong in that conversation, and it would be selfish in a lot of ways to not participate and not bring all of what I have because I don't have a degree or I haven't been consulting for 20 years or whatever it happens to be.
Amen. Good thoughts.
Well,
it takes a
just, I want to point out, I mean, what Alicia's talking about takes a lot of self-knowledge. You kind of have to be self-aware to be able to go, you know, I'm okay with contributing, and there might be somebody who's actually more qualified to help out in other ways. I could dive into this thing and think I'm going to start a new business and then quickly realize, oh, actually, I would probably be best as a salesperson, and there's other people who might need to be put around me if this is going to be a viable business. Like, you have to be pretty self-aware and loosen a lot of your grip on your ego to actually be able to have that wisdom. And I think imposter syndrome is probably tied to people not being able to release from their ego. You know, they just like, I got to be the person, I got to be the face or the whatever, and then all of a sudden, fish out of water.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so interesting to me, I've been hearing this concept so much recently because I listen to like endless podcasts, and what I find most interesting is I hear even like some of the people who are like the best of the best in the world at what they do. I hear it just consistently come up, the imposter syndrome. And I've always thought beforehand, it's like, you're only going to have these thoughts if you're actually not qualified to do something. But I've found, like, I've listened to podcasts where people won the Olympics in whatever it was. And even they talk about all the time that they even have imposter syndrome. And sure, maybe it's just like terminology at this point. Maybe it's like each person slightly means something different, but I just found that really interesting. That's like literally the best of the best people in the world still have those doubts and those questions in their mind periodically. I think it's just really, really crazy to me.
To Lee's point, and that with what you read there, what I understood from that was that the judge is you, right? Like this person was trying to like live up to some expectation that they thought they were going to have to prove in court, quote unquote, to a person that wasn't there. And at the end of the day, they were the judge. And so that makes me think of the idea of how do you see, like, who's setting these standards for you, right? So to me, just I don't want to talk about other people, but like in my head, I'm like, okay, so what if you'd have never monetized a podcast? Like, how do you, like, who's judging me for that? And like, how do I place value in that? And that's hard. I don't know how to determine that. I have no idea. It's just that you shocked me, Lee, with that, and I'm like, I have no idea who is responsible for telling me, or how do I even determine what the benchmarks are correct then, whether being a good father or being a good husband or whatever it is.
Well, you
That's
know,
wild.
Just random stuff. I think most people are so into their own heads that they're maybe 10% engaged. Going back to what Pat said at the beginning. I mean, I had so many thoughts while you were talking, Pat, too. I mean, when everybody talks, I have thoughts, but because I'm not listening. But most people are not paying attention to what you're saying. Like, I will sit in class and teach, and I realize that students have managed the art of sleeping with their eyes open. And so I'm constantly trying to break their state so they'll pay attention. But this whole thing, what I started off thinking about was we're so, as a race, okay, now we're getting deep. We're so desperate for approval that what most people do is they work on their outsides. How do I look? How do I come across? What are people thinking about me, etc. And so, to me, there are insides and outsides, and this has always been one of the things I've latched onto, is we're constantly comparing our insides with other people's outsides. If you think about it, and all of us on the inside, Alicia's heard me talk about this, but on the inside, we know how busted up or broken or insecure we are, especially in some areas. But we're looking at somebody else's outsides going, man, if I could just have it together like Pat Roach, or if I was just as sharp as Quintin, or whatever it is, we don't see what they're wrestling with internally. We only know what's going on in our own heads and hearts. So the worst thing we can do is constantly think about our insides and then look at somebody else's outsides and go, wow, they've got it together. And once I get like Alicia, once I can get that amount of knowledge or status or exposure or experience or that many clients, then I won't feel inadequate anymore. Wrong.
I got to tie in here, Lee, because a few days ago I was on the treadmill in my gym, and Colorado is one of those places where people are insanely healthy. So I'm like proud of myself because I'm on a streak and I'm very dedicated and I'm doing my thing, and I'm, Seth's advice, like build large muscle tissue and all that stuff. And this woman jumps on a treadmill 2 down and starts running, like flat out running. Yeah. And in Colorado, if you go for a hike, somebody else climbed a 14er, which is a 14,000 foot mountain. And if you climb a 14er, somebody else is climbing all of them this summer. There are 53. And like, there's a race that you run 100 miles at elevation in one day. There's a bike race called the Triple Bypass. It is designed to kill you. It goes over 3 peaks. And so like on a regular Saturday, you talk to somebody, you're like, what'd you do today? They're like, I went for a run. It was kind of short. Yeah, how long? Only 80 miles. You're like, wait, what? What is happening right now?
That's Run Alfred.
For me, all that comparison stuff, right? Like in that old poem, Deseriata, do not compare yourself with others or you will become vain and bitter, for always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. And in Colorado, like I think of it like the Colorado rule, like you got to climb your own mountain, because any place where you're doing that comparison, and to your point, Lee, it's not always even just their outside, right? It's the picture they took of their outside in perfect lighting and put on social media.
Nice. True. Perfect. Yeah.
I was just thinking social media. Well, I was just thinking of the social media piece as well, because it's kind of the perverse exaggeration of what you're talking about, Lee.
Yeah. Oh, it is. And yeah. Okay. That's another topic. That would be a good topic.
Okay, I'm writing all these down.
Okay,
good
job.
Nobody ever talks about their bad. Like I had a bad year one time, and after the pandemic, I had a bad year the first year of the pandemic, and I was talking to a friend, and I'm like, it feels like everybody else killed it, like they tripled the size of their business and blah blah blah. And God bless her, she looked at me and goes, nobody that failed is like broadcasting that on loudspeaker. Like you don't roll into the Sunday meeting like, oh, I totally blew it this week in every conceivable way, right?
Yeah, but you know what? Here's the good news. People don't relate to you through your trophies. They relate to you through your weaknesses.
True.
So if you're authentic enough to share how you screwed up, then they're like what St. Augustine said, his revelation was 2 words. You too? You too? I mean, think about that. So here's at the end of every summer, one of my jobs was to PC people. Alicia was one of them. But they would come in my office and I knew kind of their backstory a little bit. They're off schedule or they had padded their statistics or whatever. And they felt terrible, or they delivered 80% of what they wrote up, And so what I did was,
you're not making me look really good, Lee. Could you balance that out a little?
It's Alicia. Holy cow.
No.
All in one summer.
No, I just remember Alicia was crying once, which is fine. But anyway, my point was this. She didn't have all those problems. She felt bad about her summer, but when people came to my office and they felt bad, I didn't even ask them about why they felt that way. I said, let me tell you about my third summer. And then I just chronicled all the mistakes and first time off schedule. And it's an interesting story, which maybe I can tell on Ponytails. But they were just like, you too? So people can relate to you when you're brave enough to share how you've messed up and you release them from some of that imposter issue or comparing insides and outsides. Okay, I'll shut up.
Yeah.
Who else?
Wait, I thought you were hosting. Why are you shutting up?
No, keep going. Lee, you're dropping wisdom.
No. I'm sorry, Seth, I interrupted you.
Yeah,
No,
Seth, go for it.
I was actually going to kind of say the same thing that Lee brought up, which was like the people that I notice on social media who have like the biggest influence and who have like really big accounts. I notice a lot of time to the point to where they've really built like a culture around themselves and their following. I've noticed that they are really good at showing the journey, right? Not just showing the highlights. Because I think naturally on social media, a lot of people do just post like their successes, their wins, their highlights. But I just noticed like whenever I see someone's social media page and they just have like almost like a cult like following, always it's because they're sharing like that, hey, I'm a normal person too. Like here's part of my day-to-day. Here's some of the struggles I go through. Yeah. Here's a new thing I'm venturing in, and here's things I'm learning along the way.
Yeah. People need that. People need to see that, especially if they put you on a little bit of a pedestal, they need to know that you know how they feel. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge deal.
Do you think that maybe that's part of the cure to imposter syndrome, or like a good check-in is to start admitting weaknesses?
I think that was what I was going to ask next is okay, we've identified this. Well, I mean, that's good. I'm glad you chimed in. It's a perfect segue. Now that we kind of know what we're talking about at some level, we've scratched the surface. What are some strategies to overcome this syndrome that everyone suffers from? We've talked about confidence, knowledge. We had some great thoughts on that. But were there any mental strategies? I'm all about thoughts. Okay. Useful thoughts.
I can throw something in. I mean, just even hearing your illustration of the judge that wasn't there or whatever. Like, I think this would be a super interesting topic for religious leaders to get around and actually talk about. I mean, think about that industry, if we want to call it an industry or whatever. You've got people who are leading groups who are supposed to have the most answers to a thing that is, at the end of the day, completely mysterious, unprovable, and undefinable. And yet, they're making a career around the idea, in some ways, almost like certainty, or at least providing some kind of grounding for a group of people, right? How much, and especially when religious leaders have to lean into that role as the smartest person in the room regarding spiritual concepts, how much of an imposter syndrome must be underlying all of that? And yet I don't perceive a whole lot of folks in that world owning their lack of knowing, their unknowing, or their not knowing. I mean, it's kind of like, I just perceive that to be like, that would be a real, you could be a real head case in a situation like that. I
sure.
think just at my own spiritual journey, probably the most freeing thing has been getting into my 40s and finally going, I'm going to stop pretending like, or I'm going to actually be less willing to acknowledge what I know and much more willing to say, I don't know, and I don't think that is knowable, or something along those lines, like to move this back into a more realistic exchange. But the first half of my life, I think I lived in a space where I had to be the guy who knew that kind of stuff. And there's a whole mess of problems in terms of imposter syndrome that come from that.
Verily, verily, you've spoken the truth. That's sort of religious terminology I thought I'd throw in. You're right. I think you're right. You know, Sean Dean, fellow book person, alumni, he has an entire ministry he works in, which is called Standing Stone. Standing Stone. And what they do is they come alongside pastors, ministers, people in religious communities, and they walk alongside of them. And mostly they listen, because these folks are like, again, on the outside, I've got to have it together. And then their marriages are falling apart, or they've got alcohol issues, or we've seen people fall down sexually, you know, and fall from grace in that way. So again, everybody's harboring this stuff, and that arena is a tough one. So that's why I support Sean in Standing Stone, because I know what he's doing is relieving some of that pressure that people feel in that particular industry. So, okay,
Well,
good.
Hang on. I actually have a question. I'm curious, and I'm happy to go, but I'm curious where you guys feel like you're up against, or where you might be having moments of imposter syndrome, or like what your learning edge is. Like, I've just brought on some team members, and I was crabby with one yesterday. And I hate that. I hate when I do that, and I haven't been able to figure out how to give correction when I'm angsty in a way that doesn't suck. And I, have a career out of teaching people how to run organizations. So it's a little ironic, but it's a place where, I feel a little uncertain, because that's probably going to happen again, because I do crunchy things. So I don't know if you guys are willing to share, but I'm really curious where you're up against it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Let me throw out one idea. If you're a Brene Brown fan, if you've heard of Brene Brown.
Yes.
She's a researcher. She wrote a book. She's written several books. One's called Dare to Lead, and we just went through a whole seminar on it. But she talks about how to have difficult conversations when you're not in a good place. And so, anyway, I would recommend you Dare to Lead as a resource if you want to check that out. So she calls it rumbling. We need to rumble on that topic in the right way. Okay.
I think she's pretty brilliant. I think so. I'm spending a lot of time and energy on this stuff right here, which is emotional intelligence training. I have found this is captivating me. It has for the last couple of years, in the sense of the way that we learned how to deal with emotions when we were salespeople, was maybe effective in a short-term situation, but probably not a good strategy to live a life. And so even like the group of students that I led, called the Cadillac organization, like in my mind of that concept, it was, don't get too high, don't get too low, smooth and steady. And it was kind of almost like that's how you have to get through the summer. But what I think I kind of took on a little more of that than I needed to where I wasn't actually feeling anything. And I think that when we are more attuned to the feelings that we are experiencing, like, you're pointing out yesterday, you get this clash and you're like, something's going on with me emotionally here, and I'm kind of ready to freak out on this person. That's information your body's giving you to go, hey, there's something underneath it all that'd probably be worth taking a close look at, as opposed to just going, man, that's weird that I'm this big leadership person and I can't even get through this conversation with this person without wanting to scratch their eyes out.
Just to be clear, I know what to do, but my learning edge is it's the emotional stuff in the background, right? It's emotional regulation in moments where you're really committed to showing up, and it's easy to do with clients. and it's easy to help them find the keys to how they can be more effective in those moments. And it's just the next place for me to spend time and energy, making sure that I'm uncovering what's at the heart of that for me and finding better ways to manage it in the moment. So yeah, and thank you for the compliment, because
yeah, and you know what,
consultant, that's
great way to learn this stuff. Have kids.
no.
I don't know, Lee. To be honest with you, I get where you're going with that, but if you're unless you're an intentional parent, you can just ruin more people's lives by having kids.
Yeah. Thank you for, yes, I was going somewhere differently than that. But it's, you know, it's easy to take care of clients and you go home and you're like, shut up, you know. So anyway, we're all on a journey.
But that's the part, Alicia, where I would say the developing the response of, hey, something's going on with me in this moment. I should probably drill down into that and see what that is happening for a reason. What's underneath it? What's causing that? And even just being able to identify, oh, I'm actually pissed off about all these other things over here, and she's just pressing those buttons. And this is really about that. And now I can deal with some kind of progress in getting through my, funk or whatever. I don't know. But I think intelligence is like such a fascinating field. And I thought I really kind of knew that stuff just because I sold books a bunch of summers. I really did not at all. I was kind of actually stunted probably from selling books. And not to take down selling books, but it's a short-term thing instead of a lifetime thing.
Amen. So any overused skill or strength becomes a weakness. So at Southwestern, we were taught certain skills which worked in that setting and still have application, but they can be overused. And they're inappropriate in other arenas. So another topic. Andres.
Alicia, to answer your question, I think for me, where you saying like in the places, the edge or where it's I don't know what I don't know. I'm at that space in this where it's like I wish I knew what I didn't know to at least be like, all right, here's where I'm ignorant and this is what I need to learn, all these different ways. But there's every time I feel like every day I'm doing this and I'm like, oh, how the hell did I not know that? And it makes me mad and I get frustrated on that.
Good news. I just turned 65 a few days ago and I know less than Pat and he's 49. So accept it. Be coachable. I love what Alicia said earlier about, you know what? I see somebody down on the street. I'm not a doctor, but I'm going to be present with them. I'm going to give them whatever I've got in humility. And people love that. I used to be afraid of helping people who had a friend who died. We've got a friend at church whose daughter just underwent surgery. She's so severely physically handicapped, she can't even take care of herself. But one thing you could sign up to do was to come spend time with Anna. She's 9 years old. She's in a wheelchair. She's just like barely functional. And I thought, I have no ability I don't know what to do. And I thought, you know what? All I got to do is just give what I have, which is what you were talking about, Alicia. So I'm going to spend some time with Anna. Maybe I'll just be reading a book, but that's the best that you can give. And people appreciate your presence. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something you said there I think could also be part of the solution, which you said is be coachable. In other words, find a coach. Find somebody. If you're feeling like an imposter, maybe you go find somebody who's done it like you want to do it, and then get some coach.
But I also think you got to be careful about that, because sometimes, you meet somebody with like 15 degrees and they're off getting another degree. Like that hole is never going to get filled, right? And there is a time and a place to get technical expertise, but a lot of times the thing that's messing with your head is not a lack of expertise. It's whatever thing it is that messes with your head. So I just, like you can spend a lot of money trying to get credentials or technical knowledge. And sometimes it's more about showing up and being willing, because the thing that's driving you is not that you lack technical knowledge. It's some other insecurity or fear or, like that. Not that I'm against hiring coaches, for the record.
Yo, Lee, to answer your question like 10 minutes ago, like what do we do when we are in that situation where to backtrack to minute 3 when it's like, all right, I feel imposter syndrome, like what do I do? I think the most foundational part of this is just accept, and you kind of just mentioned this, accepting the fact and being okay with not knowing things, not being the best in the room. So for me, that's the most foundational. All right, I have to accept the fact that I might not know something, and that's okay. Next for me is I put myself around people who do know what they're doing in that specific area. And then naturally, by osmosis / through their belief, through their skills, I will learn. And whether that's just me being around them, or whether that's hiring a coach, or whether that's going and doing my own. So I guess the next part of that is gaining knowledge in that specific thing. And whether that is through a coach or just doing my own like education, I think that's a really big thing for me, is when I gain the knowledge, then naturally over time that imposter syndrome doesn't necessarily always go away, because then when I get to the next level, then that might be there again, but it minimizes it in that stage. And then I made a social media post, I think like a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned the 4 words that I've used, or the 4 questions that I've asked myself to achieve in whatever area. And the words that are associated with this are what, why, who, and how. And what is like, what are my goals, right? Like after I've put myself in an area where I don't really know what's going on, I'm trying to, in that area, let's say like for me, just starting my fitness business, right? All right, this is a totally new area. So what are my goals? Where am I heading? Like what am I working for? Next is why. Like why do I want to achieve the goals that I've set? Because it is going to get tough. There are going to be challenges. So when they do, like what is it going to be? Like why am I going to push past those challenges? Third is who. Like who has already achieved what I want to achieve? And if I'm going into new territory, like let's say for instance Emil or Peter, these last like 2 years breaking the company record, they are going into uncharted territories. But what they could do is they could study other people who've gone into uncharted territories and succeeded. Right. So it's like you either find someone who's specifically done what you want to do, or find other people in different areas that have done a similar thing. And then the last question is how. Like, how did they achieve what I want to achieve? Like, what have they done to get to where they are? And then at that point, it's really just like modeling after their actions, their habits, their beliefs, like how are they showing up, their character traits. And then for me, naturally, just as those things ramp up, then the imposter syndrome starts to go away. And then before I know it, I'm achieving really, really cool things.
Good stuff.
Boom.
Drop the mic.
Well,
There it went.
There, well done, sir. Are we calling it a derby meeting? Is this good?
That just happened.
Yeah.
Everybody, for a second, did I black out?
Oh, have we started this yet? Is it?
We're gonna actually broadcast here.
Quintin, we're just going to roll into a new topic, and you're going first. Go.
Perfect.
My dog is freaking out. Thank you, guys. I'll be on the next one.